How's it going, guys? I'm Josh, and today we are starting a brand new series on this YouTube channel, and that is a photo review series. You guys asked for it, where you guys get to send in your photos and I talk about them. So a couple housekeeping things before we get started. Number one, thank you so much to everyone that sent in your photos. Even if I don't talk about them today, I very much enjoyed seeing them, hearing your stories, and you know what? It takes balls to send in your photos, and prepare yourself for my harsh critique. So thank you guys, and keep sending them in because I'm probably gonna do more of these. If you like this, you're gonna have to let me know. Number two, I'm going to be critical. The whole point in doing critiques is for you to improve in photography, and that's not gonna happen unless I'm a bit of a dick. So I'm gonna make examples out of people, and just bear with me because you're gonna get better at photography as a result. The one thing I hate is photo critiques where everyone's just super nice and no one actually critiques any photos. It's all just like, oh, I like this. We're not going to be doing that today. Number three, these are all my opinions, so you might disagree with them, and if you do, I highly encourage you to leave a comment below arguing with me, because photos are subjective and what I like isn't necessarily what's good. On that note, number four, if you want to see my work and judge it before knowing if I'm worthy of judging your work, feel free to check it out. It's all up on my website over here. And last thing, number five, if you want to be in my next photo review video, you can submit your photos to joshkatzphotos@gmail.com and only send 1 or 2 shots, because if you send 8 of them, I don't want to go through it. That's it. Let's get started with the critiquing and tearing you guys apart. No, I'm just kidding, I think. I'm not sure yet. First off, we have a nice street photo from Ian, and when you look at the raw file, it looks okay, and then you look at the edited shot, and it looks really great. And I gotta hand it to him, he did a really nice job editing, except here's the thing. I'm not a fan of black and white, and not everyone agrees with me on this, but I think that shooting digital when you're shooting in full color and then making it black and white is cheap because everything looks good in black and white. That's the fact of the matter. When you make something black and white in your editing, it's gonna look artistic and cool. So I try never to make my digital shots black and white unless I set out to make it black and white when I was shooting the photo. But you're shooting in color, so try to embrace it. I'm gonna try and edit this photo and see what I can do with it in color and see if we can still get a compelling image, just to show you guys you don't have to make your shots black and white. Another thing, his shutter speed was 1/4000th of a second, ISO 500, f1.8. So I like the f1.8, nice for a shallow depth of field. However, your ISO is much higher than it needs to be, and same with the shutter speed. What I would have done is realized he clearly had a lot of light because he was shooting midday with the low aperture number. So I would bring the ISO down to 100 and then adjust the shutter speed from there so it could be a little slower, and you'd have less noise because the higher the ISO, the more noise you're gonna get. And if you ever wanted to print your photos, it does make a difference having lower ISOs. Anyway, thank you, Ian, for submitting. Next up, we have a photo from Taylor, and this is awesome. The story goes, he hiked up a mountain at 3:30 a.m. in Alaska in negative 15-degree weather to get this shot, which is incredible. And you see some northern lights, and I'm super jealous because that's all I wanna see in my life. But I have an issue with this shot, and basically, it's a really beautiful backdrop, but in the foreground, there's absolutely nothing. There's just trees, sort of, but the trees aren't the main focus. They sort of frame the lower part. What I would do is actually, when you have a really nice backdrop, sometimes you need a nice foreground. So I would pick a particularly compelling tree that you want to have in focus in the main screen, and then have that, and then with the stars in the background, or try having a lake or a person or anything in the foreground, because the background is great, but you're not really sure if you're supposed to be looking at the trees or not. And I would just have something in the foreground to balance it out. You'll have a much, much stronger image. Sometimes with photography, the trick is you need multiple layers of quality. So if you have a great backdrop, that's good, but you could add in a great subject in front and now have a great subject and a great backdrop. You could light that subject well, and you have 3 things going for you. So sometimes you're shooting a landscape and it's like, you know what, this is kind of boring. Sometimes you just gotta throw a person in front and you'll have a great shot, just something to focus on, so the landscape isn't just the main focus. But I do really appreciate Taylor's dedication to photography. He clearly has potential. Next off, we have a really cool image from this kid, Ryan, and it's 2 images combined. One is of the plane shot at 1/100th of a second, and then one is of the car shot at a 6-second long exposure. And that's super cool. It's really strange seeing such slow movement and fast movement together, and I love it. Now, something to consider, guys, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Between, you have something pretty cool, then you add one more cool thing, and now you just have like a really strong image. Next off, we have an image from Tala shot at the JFK Memorial in Dallas, Texas, where he was assassinated. And it's very cool seeing these photos from all over the world. The shot is really strong. You have these awesome lines that frame up the people in the middle, and then you have the empty office building. So compositionally, it's awesome. My only critique for you is to think about when you shoot the photo. So This looks like it was shot as light was going down, and basically everything's really dark and the lighting isn't that strong on the subjects. Then if you shoot earlier in the day, like when the sun's coming up, or as the sun's coming down a little further in golden hour, you might have some really nice light on these walls and on the people to make them pop out a little bit more, because when you have average lighting like this, the people don't pop at all. Another thing you could use is a flash if you have an off camera. All in all, this is a very cool shot and I'm impressed. And if you live near here, I'd be curious to see if you tried shooting this at a better time of day with cooler lighting. Next off, we have two pretty cool shots from Maddie shot in the UK on a camping trip. I love these stories. First off, we have this shot with the trees in the front, and this is sort of the same thing where you're wondering what was the intent for the composition. Did you want these trees to be in the foreground in the bottom left-hand corner, or was that an accident? So I would maybe consider zooming in a little bit more so you have more focus on the trees that are actually lit beautifully and not just what looks like a bush. And then this next photo, also very cool location with an awesome sunset, but something to consider is this foreground looks sort of So two things to consider. You could bring the shadows up to expose it a little bit more, or two, I would actually move forward, get close to the lake and catch that amazing reflection, because those clouds look incredible and looks like a perfect smooth lake. So a lot of potential there. Either a zoom lens or just being closer up and cutting out the foreground, I think would be your best bet. Another thing to mention is I don't know what the situation is like. Maybe the area in front is a marshland and you went as far as you could before getting your feet soaked. Who knows? But just based on basic speculation from seeing the image, that's what I would have tried to do. Next up, we have a really cool long exposure from Lewis, and a couple things I want to say. So first off, he found a really cool angle. He uses 18 to 55 stock lens, super wide at 18 millimeters, so that the cars passing him would be more dramatic, and I really like that. I think, yeah, it's good composition. The only thing I don't like is you're pointed really high up. So there's all this black space there where nothing's happening, yet there's all this space below you where there could be really dramatic, interesting looking rough ground, because usually in long exposures, the light from cars will actually light up the gravel to make it look really rough and you see all the texture. So I would have gone a little bit lower. And another thing, and this is, again, me being nitpicky, but it looks like you only had one bus or one car come in for that lighting. Now, if you ever want to have more cool lights in the same exact location, keep that camera set up on a tripod. And then I'm going to link to a tutorial below where you can actually take, 10 different exposures with different cars from the same location and very easily combine them together in Photoshop. It's a really cool technique, especially when you don't have the traffic that you want. If you have a bunch of cars moving through, you're only going to need one photo, but if the cars come every, say, 30 seconds, then a 15-second exposure isn't enough to catch enough cars, and this is perfect for you. Next off, we have a really cool image from Alex in Florida, and they used a 15-second long exposure with a neutral density filter. And I have a tutorial for this if you're interested, where you can actually make a long exposure during the daytime. And this is a really cool shot, and they did a good job editing it by straightening it. You'll see between the raw and the edited file that they straighten the horizon line, which is really crucial. I highly recommend you do this with all your shots, because it makes it look much, much neater. Now, my only critique is it looks like they didn't give me the exposure, but the shot was a little bit overexposed. And I know that because there's so much white in there. Look at the sky and look at the ocean, and it's just really, really bright. And what happens when you overexpose a shot too much is you lose out on all this information, because once it becomes white, now there's nothing you can really do with it except let it be white. But if it were to be a little bit darker, it looks like there are all these potential colors that could have been brought out in the photo with just a slightly shorter long exposure. Now, with these long exposures, it's really hard to calculate the length of time that you should be shooting to get that perfectly lit, right amount of brightness image. So I recommend just doing a couple. So do one at 10 seconds, do one at 12, do one at 15, and then do one at 18 really. Just experiment and do a couple at each exposure, because lighting always changes and you'll have much more potential for all your images. I wish this were lighter, because then we could do a lot of cool stuff with this and actually bring out the colors more, and it wouldn't even have to be black and white. But that's just a tangent. This is a really cool image, and Alex, great work. Next off, we have a photo from Michael, and it's this really cool bokeh shot. It looks like he used a Christmas tree behind a person for this really nice bokeh effect. Now, I'm gonna make an example out of you, Michael, and say there are two things here that I would have done differently. So first, when you're shooting a portrait of someone, especially if you're using bokeh with a low aperture number, with super shallow depth of field, you always wanna make sure you focus on that person's eyes. It'll look best, I guarantee it. So this looks like he focused I'm not even sure exactly, but the man looks a little bit out of focus. And when you're using these low aperture numbers for bokeh, or just low aperture numbers in general, you always want to make sure you get that really exact focus, because if you're not focused well enough, it's very obvious. If you're shooting at f7.1 and you're focused on the nose versus the eyes, you won't really be able to tell. But yeah, this is obvious. And then second is he has a very low angle. Now I understand this might be important for actually framing him up with the Christmas tree, but low angles tend to not be too flattering for portraits. So just something to consider. Maybe he didn't want to make the man look flattering because he hated him. Also something to consider. Next off, we have some photos from Jordan from San Diego. And this one shot is really cool. And I really liked it. It looks like he used a long exposure to have the clouds drag out. And that's why you see the tree looks stable with the leaves blowing. Now, something I would consider is if you look at the stem of the tree. If you look at the trunk of the tree, I actually had to just look up a tree diagram to make sure I have the right word. You'll see it's very dark, and you could have brought this up with bringing up your shadows in Photoshop. Next off, we have a really remarkable image from Sho, and this was taken in Hawaii. It's insane. It doesn't look like he's even on this planet except for the sun. That's amazing. So my only critique is you shot this photo with an ISO of 200, an aperture of f2.8, an exposure of 1/4000. So you got a great moment. You know, you can see the clear happiness of this guy. Now, what I would have done differently is if you look, the guy is nicely in focus, which is right. You should have focused on the person, but everything else is really out of focus. If you look at the clouds, they're a little bit blurry, and that's just because you use such a shallow depth of field. Now for this, when you have such a striking landscape, and for most landscapes in general, I would try and use an aperture of say 7.1, because that's usually the sharpest aperture for cameras. And as a result, you'll have everything in focus and not just the person. And what you could do to fix that is actually use a slower exposure, say, you know, 1/250th. 1/4000th is excessively fast. Next off, we have a really cool lightning photo from Ines, and I love lightning shots. I think it's really just, it's beautiful. It's one of those things that people always see but never frozen, so it's always striking to see. Now, a couple suggestions I have for you. First, it's very yellow, the image, and I think he may have done that in editing to make the purple lightning look very purple, which is totally fine. But what I would do instead is make the shot a little bit more cold, a little bluer, and then actually bump up in the HSL part of Lightroom, bring up the purples to saturate it, and mess with the hue even, so you don't have this unnaturally yellow town. And then another thing is, if you want to get more lightning, they use the shutter speed of 1 second, which is really hard because it just requires perfect timing. So this lightning shot that I took, I used an exposure of 30 seconds so that any lightning that went down within those 30 seconds would be perfectly caught. So I was just shooting for maybe 30 minutes, continuously pressing it. And when that photo was taken, I was in the kitchen getting a cookie. Like, it's that easy because it's just a matter of waiting for it to happen during that exposure. So when you use longer exposures, you're gonna have a little bit more success, and you might even catch more lightning bolts. So definitely something to consider. Next off, we have two really cool images from Tom. And what I like about this bird one is that there's nothing technically complex about this image, no crazy techniques, but it's an awesome moment, and you can just see that happening. I've definitely seen it happen myself, and he captured it perfectly, and that's sick. And then of course you've got a hill bomb and a mountain and everything that I love in one photo, so I'm so sold. Both are tremendous shots. If I had to offer one little piece of advice, and I think this is fine, but he shot this mountain shot at f4, and if you look at the house, it's a little bit out of focus. Now I would have gone a little bit higher of an aperture number, maybe bump up the ISO a bit, maybe say 7.1 as an aperture, and as a result you'd have a little bit more in focus, because when you're trying to get these vast sweeping landscapes, I think the more in focus the better. But just my opinion. I've got to run to class now, so we're gonna cap this off. Now, I don't know how this went. I don't know if you guys liked this or if it was successful, so please leave a comment down below. Let me know what you thought of this. If you learned something, if it was a total waste of your time, letting me know if you like this and if you want to see more. And if you do, also be sure to send me more images to critique. So again, I'll put how to submit these photos in the description down below, but I really look forward to seeing all of your images. I love this, and hopefully you guys found this to be valuable in some sort of way. And if you want to see more of my photos, you can follow me on Instagram. You can also check out my website to see my entire camera setup. Lots of photo tutorials. I posted all of them on my website now, and all kinds of other stuff. I also sell prints of my best shots. Anyway guys, thank you so much for all of your submissions. I loved looking at every single one of them, and I look forward to seeing more of your photos. Thank you so much for watching, for submitting, and for everything, and I will see you eventually. And now I have to go to class.